Now
on News Talk 105.9 WMAL.
O'Connor and Company.
It's 5:06 this Tuesday morning. It's O'Connor and Company. Thanks for tuning in here. Good to talk with you on this. It's going to be bright and blustery and very fall-like Tuesday morning, and we're loaded up and ready to get you where you need to go. 6:35. William Daroff is going to join us. He's the CEO of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations. Talk about today's big march expected on the Mall. Hundreds and thousands of American Jews ready to push back a little bit on the protests we've seen around this country. 7:05, Representative August Pfluger from Texas going to talk about the border crisis. 7:35, Mark Paletta is going to discuss the latest in the Supreme Court and how they've now instituted certain guidelines for justices. This war against Clarence Thomas continues. 8:05, Adam Gillette is going to join us, Accuracy in Media. And at 8:35, Greg Pemberton, D.C. Police Union, talk about Mayor Bowser instituting a special state of emergency in D.C. I mean, we've known that for a while, haven't we? It's Larry O'Connor alongside Angela Morabito, who's in for Julie Gunlock. Angela is from the Defense of Freedom Institute, also a visiting fellow at IWF. And you're acting like you've already had 10 shots of espresso this morning, Angela. So we're very excited for your energy right now.
Well, thank you, Larry. I wish I felt like I had had 10 shots of espresso this morning, but I'm grateful to be with you. It's going to be a busy and exciting day.
Well, for everyone waiting for their Tuesday dose of Julie Gunlock, she's a little under the weather. She's actually, she has appendicitis. She had to have her. I just want you to know, Angela, Julie Gunlock did yesterday's program in extreme, excruciating pain, as she was just moments away from having to get rushed to the hospital and have her appendix removed. So we expect nothing less from you, Angela.
My gosh. Julie is a warrior
she
there.
Is an
I have
absolute
very
warrior.
Big shoes to fill for today. And Julie, if you're listening, oh my gosh, we hope you feel better.
Yes, Julie is at our prayers. She's going to be fine, though. It was just touching base with her before we went on the air, and she's setting all the nurses straight in the hospital, and everything's going to be fine. She's going to be fine. Meanwhile, it's great to catch up with you, Angela. I know you're doing great work, especially with regard to the education realm and what's going on campus. Defense of Freedom Institute's done so much in that regard. And after the October 7th attacks on Israeli civilians by the terrorist Hamas organization, you've got a brand new mandate now as you see this unbelievable outward display of hateful anti-Semitism on campus. Tell me about what you've been doing in that regard.
So the Defense of Freedom Institute is tracking this issue very closely because really it's on all of us to stand up to the just horrible wave of anti-Semitism that has been on display on college campuses. Now, I formerly served in the Department of Education under Secretary Betsy DeVos as her press secretary for a time. So I'm really pretty familiar with how that department works. And it has something called the Office for Civil Rights, which is supposed to stand up for students' civil rights in education. It has done painfully little to support Jewish students who are feeling unsafe, who are under threat on these campuses. It has yet to announce a single investigation into campus anti-Semitism.
How's that possible? I mean, we've done more about what we've seen on these videos right here on this radio program. We've investigated it more than the Department of Education's own civil rights department. That's outrageous. I mean, it's plain as the nose on your face. And all you hear from the Biden administration is they're very concerned about anti-Muslim and Islamophobic hate, which we don't want any discrimination or hate on campus. But the vast majority of incidents that we see are these anti-Jewish incidents.
If they were concerned for America's Jewish students, they would have already stepped up. It's incredibly disappointing to see because so far, all they've done is said, well, we're going to make it easier for someone to file a civil rights complaint. They tweeted about, here's how you do it, and they've committed to streamlining the process. All well and good, but they don't have to wait for someone to file a complaint to take action, right? We've all seen the videos of those poor students in the library at Cooper Union who are just surrounded by a mob that's banging on the doors. I mean, the fact that that could happen in America is just astounding. But all of these videos are out there. And yet the Biden administration is sitting on its hands and apparently waiting for someone to tell them about it before they're going to do anything.
Well, and the universities themselves don't seem to be activated to do anything either. It took forever for the leadership in the administration at Harvard to say anything about what was happening on their campus and the statements that were put out, public statements within 48 hours of these terrorist attacks. You had these public statements from Harvard groups, over 30 of them, I believe, that said that they, were against the apartheid occupation of the territories. There were still bodies lying in their own blood in the area of the attack, and they were falling over themselves to lend support to the Hamas terrorists. There's a new open letter now put out by the Harvard College Jewish Alumni Association. These are over 1,600 alums of Harvard who have gone on to have very successful careers for themselves, and they've put out a letter to the Harvard administration saying that they're going to pull all of their funding from Harvard College, Harvard University, if they don't do something to fix this. I don't know what they can do to fix this at this point. I think that they've so sullied their name and so sullied their brand. But I think sadly, we can't count on the government to do anything. I think we're going to need private people and private individuals and organizations to say not one thin dime from us ever again.
I really commend the groups and the individuals who have looked at their colleges, realized they tolerate anti-Semitic hate, and said, not another dime. That right there, albeit in a very sad way, is the free market at work, where somebody has the ability to say, my dollars are not going to go fund this. I sure hope it gets the college's attention for all the open letters and all the ink that has been spilled on this topic. What seems to get their attention is when they may be having to take a financial hit. It's really sad that that's what it takes, but you know what? Kudos to those alumni for saying we are not going to encourage or fund a place that allows this kind of hate to flourish.
Anything that comes from Harvard now, though, is really just sort of a token damage control PR stunt. You know what I mean? Harvard may be concerned that they're losing all these donations and losing endowments and losing money, but they should be concerned that they have a broken moral compass, and they didn't step up to protect what is morally right and what is true and the Jewish students that are on their campus. And I think that this may be a turning point for many people in this country in terms of how we look at so-called elite universities. I've been heartened by how many people have come out on social media and said, you know what, I think we need to reorient what we as parents prioritize with our kids. A really good state university, state college, or small private college, probably much better for our kids' further education than what we've all considered to be an elite university.
You're right. These colleges may have elite brand names, but I don't know if we could really call them elite anymore.
Yeah.
Are you really an elite college if your students are so miseducated that they would side with Hamas over, supporting innocent Israeli civilians? Are you really elite if your students are so miseducated and really just so morally bankrupt that they would create an environment where their Jewish peers are unsafe? It's past time for a reckoning in education for a lot of reasons, but this is certainly one of them. We're also starting to see this sort of indoctrination happen in K through 12.
Ooh, yeah. Hold your thought. You're right. We need to look beyond the college campuses and what's going on in our public schools, our K through 12 schools. We've got a story right in our backyard in Montgomery County, Maryland. I know you've got some other things too, so hold that. We'll get a little bit more on this growing concern in education. But first, it's 5:15.
Your favorite WMAL shows when you want them. Download the new WMAL app and listen on demand.
Well, let's turn to K through 12, and specifically in our backyard, Montgomery County, Maryland, in Bethesda, which, by the way, has a pretty significant Jewish population, with North Bethesda on the Rockville border there having a huge Jewish center. I used to live right next door to it. According to Luke Rosiak's reporting at the Daily Wire, there's a public school teacher in Bethesda, Maryland. She's identified as a diversity, equity, and inclusion teacher, a DEI teacher. I don't even know what that means. Do they teach DEI? Are they there because of DEI? What What is a DEI teacher?
That is a job title I have never heard before, but if I were to hazard a guess here, I'd say it's about as useful as every other DEI position.
Yeah.
Which is, it takes a bunch of money and makes zero difference for students.
Thank you. Well, there, that answers it. All right, so the diversity, equity, inclusion teacher has posted anti-Semitic conspiracy theories on social media, defending Hamas, claiming there was no attack on October 7th, and also stating that Jews kill Palestinians to sell their organs. And this teacher is still employed. Luke Rosiak says that Montgomery County Public Schools declined to condemn her comments, said it would not tell the public, even if she was disciplined, but right now there's no record that she has been. And Luke Rosiak says they went on to not explain what a DEI teacher does. See, I'm glad I'm not the only one.
Montgomery County students, parents, taxpayers deserve so much better. First of all, they deserve a school district that doesn't hire a crazy person.
Thank you. What can those parents do, though? If there's parents listening right now saying, this is outrageous, I'm paying for this, these are coming from my tax dollars, what can they do, since you've been sort of in the room there at the education department, knowing what the tools are at their disposal? Her title is Team Leader, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Teacher there at Tilden Middle School. And on her social media post, she basically is carrying water for Hamas propaganda.
It is so sadly predictable.
Yeah. We need to, hopefully we'll spend some more time on this as the morning goes on, because Luke just took to press with this late yesterday afternoon, and we want to get as much attention on it as possible. A little bit more here coming up, including what teachers in Seattle, Washington are doing. Again, public school teachers, members of the union, what their plan is. This is what you're paying for, but this is shedding light on this is going to expose these things and divide these extremists from the institutions that they've infected, be it the teachers' unions or our actual publicly funded school systems. It's 521. And we get this latest update out of the Seattle school system, where the teachers' union has now proposed a resolution for the Seattle Education Association calling for a ceasefire, which of course is basically a hand of support to the Hamas terrorists. The Seattle Education Association planning to bring forth this anti-Israel resolution at its representative assembly. And it also includes various lies. This is from the post-millennial reporting. Various lies about the Jewish state, sides completely with Hamas. Document omits the mention of the 1,400 Israeli civilians who were massacred on October 7th and the 200 hostages that are currently being held. So, first of all, why is the Seattle Education Association even putting out a statement about this? It's not their job. Teach our kids how to read and and math. We don't need to know, oh gosh, the burning question and how we're going to direct our foreign policy is what does the Seattle Education Association have to say? But then when they do put out a word about it, it's 100% on the side of the terrorists.
The sheer arrogance of these people to think that they have the ability or really just the motivation to try and dictate foreign policy is pretty absurd. But look at what the document does include. It does say its strategic goals are to create a sense of belonging, reduce anxiety, and eliminate racist practices. Okay, if they want to get serious about any of those goals, they need to drop that resolution and stand up for their Jewish students immediately. They're going against everything they claim to stand for with this ridiculous pro-Hamas resolution.
Yeah, and by the way, every single teacher in that union that doesn't agree with that position, they should immediately use that Janus decision from the Supreme Court and pull their dues. Every single public employee can have rescind your dues from being taken out of your paycheck to pay for policies that you disagree with. The Supreme Court has already declared that. Why every single union member who doesn't agree with this stuff doesn't already do that, I'll never know. But that needs to happen post-haste. I can't believe any of the teachers actually agree with this.
It's pretty astounding, and it also shows us where their morals are, really where their lack of morals are. So if parents think that this kind of indoctrination isn't in K through 12, they're absolutely kidding themselves. There is a reason this teacher union feels entitled to try and dictate foreign policy. And that's because they think they can be activists and that they should be activists in the classroom and train the next generation to believe the same terrible thing.
It's 5:29.
WMAL-FM, Woodbridge, Washington, a Cumulus media station.
Making sense of the news.
News Talk 105.9.
News now.
WMAL News.
Now.
On News Talk 105.9 WMAL.
O'Connor and Company.
It's 5:36 as we trudge along here on this Tuesday morning. I'm kidding. We're not trudging. We're flying along with tons going on. Today's the big march downtown at the mall for those supporting the state of Israel. Let your voices be heard. It's going to be a massive humanity, but there's also going to be quite a bit of road closures, too. So get all that information at WMAL.com. Coming up at 6:35, William Daroff with the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations to tell us what to expect from this march today. 7:05, Representative August Pfluger from Texas about the worsening border crisis. 7:35, our friend Mark Paletta about what's going on in the Supreme Court. In fact, we're going to give you an update right now about that. 8:05, Adam Gillette, Accuracy and Media. And then 8:35, Greg Pemberton, the chairman of the Police Union of D.C., the mayor declaring a state of emergency over the crime problems. We'll get into all the details of that, too. Angela Morabito for the Defense of Freedom Institute and IWF is with us all morning for an ailing Julie Gunlock. Thank you, Angela, for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Let's talk about the Supreme Court. There's a couple of things going on. I mentioned a moment ago that the Supreme Court has instituted new rules for the justices after growing pressure, mostly aimed at Clarence Thomas. But really, if there is a problem on the Supreme Court, and I don't even think it is a problem, but if there is a problem that needs fixing, it's for all the justices. I want to get into the details of that in a moment. But first, there's something even more nefarious and more disconcerting going on in the Biden administration. The husband of Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, his name is Dr. Patrick Jackson. He has been nominated to an entity called the D.C. Judicial Disabilities and Tenure Commission. Now, this commission has the power to suspend or retire or remove judges in the D.C. court system. And it also provides oversight of judges. And generally speaking, it's supposed to evaluate whether they continue to be mentally competent and capable of serving as a judge. And it will inevitably be used for political purposes to oversee judges whose opinions end up before his wife's Supreme Court. So this seems like a clear conflict of interest and an incredible amount of power given to a man who has direct ties to the Supreme Court and also is beholden to the Biden administration for appointing his wife to the Supreme Court.
I think about this in terms of the comparison that might exist in the private sector. Like, let's say somebody's the CEO of a company, meaning Justice Jackson, is at the very top of their field, and someone who works underneath them, meaning her husband, having the power to decide what does and does not come across her desk. There is no company in its right mind that would tolerate that. So to allow it in government is a major ethical mistake.
At the very least, yeah. And as the reporting continues, Dr. Jackson has provided expert testimony for clients in litigation, probably in the D.C. court system itself, and he failed to mention this work in a hearing with the D.C. Council when he was asked if he would have any conflict of interest. He merely disclosed that he was a doctor at Georgetown University Hospital, but the fact that he's provided legal expert testimony in this regard is an obvious conflict of interest. Nowhere on Dr. Jackson's 15-page resume he submitted does he mention he's been paid to provide expert witness testimony or consulting on malpractice cases. Why doesn't he disclose that? And why isn't this as public and as much of an outrage? This is a person who has actual power over the judges that are going to be beholden to the Supreme Court and Justice Brown Jackson's decisions.
Justice Brown Jackson and her husband are clearly very smart people. They know this is a conflict of interest. They know this is not right, or else why else would they try to hide it?
Yeah.
They're just hoping the rest of the world doesn't figure it out.
Well, yeah,
and that raises major concerns.
It does raise them, and this is typical DC stuff. It's honestly, they're all angry that Clarence Thomas's wife Ginny is politically active and doing her stuff, but they haven't been able to point to one single solitary, even potential conflict of interest that would disqualify Supreme Court Justice Thomas. But this kind of thing is exactly what they claim to be concerned about. Meanwhile, the Supreme Court, for some reason, has bowed to pressure, even though they don't have to. Constitutionally, they are a completely separate entity. The only time the Senate has any authority in terms of oversight has to do with the nomination and process and the voting process for judges. Other than that, the Supreme Court make their own rules. And they've now adopted a so-called ethics code. They announced it yesterday. It's a 14-page code of conduct written to dispel the misunderstanding that the court's 9 justices regard themselves as unrestricted by any ethics rules. But let me be clear. They are. They can make up their own rules. Now they've put forth these guidelines for themselves to follow. But the actual details, let's see. Self-issued code covers 5 canons of conduct, directing each justice to uphold the integrity and independence of the judiciary, avoid impropriety and the appearance of impropriety in all activities, perform your duties fairly, impartially, and diligently. I mean, that's already baked in the cake. This is what you expect the Supreme Court justices to do. And by announcing this code of conduct, it suggests, I think, or implies that there was a problem that needed fixing.
It's incredibly telling that this code of conduct has no enforcement mechanism.
Oh, and then there's that.
Right, a rule book with no ability to enforce the rules is nothing more than a virtue signal.
As Chris Plant often likes to say, were it not for double standards, the left would have no standards at all. Mark Paletta, who is a fierce defender of Clarence Thomas, will be joining us to discuss this and what else is happening at the Supreme Court coming up today at 7:35. Right now, it's 5:40. I call it 5:47. I was 2 seconds off there. Now it's 5:47. We mentioned that teacher in Montgomery County, Bethesda, Maryland. We're hoping we'll be mentioning it more throughout the morning because it's absolutely outrageous. The DEI teacher who's been posting some of the vilest anti-Semitic tropes on social media and still a teacher in good standing with Montgomery County. There's definitely a problem over in Montgomery County, to say the very least. And now the good folks at America First Legal have filed a lawsuit against the Montgomery County public school system and the Montgomery County Board of Education for violating First Amendment rights of citizens. They've been denied access to school board meetings, as we have mentioned in the past year on this program. And one of the cool things about this, 3 cool things about this. The first is that the lawsuit is being spearheaded by Ian Pryor, who you hear often on this program as a guest out of Loudoun County, who has made education reform and parents' rights one of his key focuses. But also, it's in the name of Matthew Foldy and Bethany Mandel, 2 people you also hear on this program all the time. These are 2 Montgomery County residents who, yes, are also journalists and political activists, and their rights have been denied. They're taxpayers. They have every right and every responsibility, for that matter, to be able to attend these school board meetings and to speak in the public forum. And Montgomery County Board of Education and the Montgomery County School Board have violated those rights. So, I mean, we are. I feel like it's, a family reunion here on this lawsuit, Angela, as we see all of the players involved in a lawsuit that could finally actually make a difference in Montgomery County.
This lawsuit is so important because it's going to wake up 2 groups of people. First and most obviously, the Montgomery County School Board is going to realize that they owe taxpayers, parents, and families transparency. And the second group is a little bit less obvious, and that is parents across the country who have been shut out of their children's education, who I would hope are going to see this and say, wait a second, oh no, I have a legal right to know what's going on. I predict that this lawsuit will be the first of many, and I'm very optimistic that it will be successful.
They had a school board meeting on June 27th. Part of the agenda item there was the opt-out clause. You'll remember that the Montgomery County School Board adopted a new policy for all public schools, government-funded schools in Montgomery County, that gender ideology and other explicitly sexual issues would be involved in the curriculum and in the materials in the books, even at the elementary school level. And for the first time ever, parents would no longer have the option of opting their children out. This has always been the slow creep, as you know from your days at the Department of Education, that advocates wanted to put this explicit material into the curriculum. But the one sort of safety valve that it's just a bone they've thrown at parents is, well, if you want to opt your child out, which of course means the onus is on the parents to have to go out of their way to opt their child out. And also, let's face it, advocates for school prayer have always been told that, we've always said, listen, let there be a moment of silence where children can pray. And if a student doesn't want to pray, they can always opt out. They don't have to pray. Oh, you're casting shame and public humiliation on the child who chooses not to pray. Well, what about the shame and public humiliation on the child whose parents opt them out of the sexually explicit materials? It works both ways. That said, responsible parents, if they wish to, can opt their children out. No, says Montgomery County Schools. You can't opt out anymore. You have no rights here. You have no voice here. And they extended that principle that parents have no voice to this June 27th school board meeting where this policy would be discussed. It was for invited attendees and pre-selected speakers only at the open session. And Bethany Mandel and Matthew Foldy, who had petitioned to speak, were denied that right, and that's where the lawsuit comes from.
What this district has done is illuminate their very warped view of rights. These people obviously think they have the right to teach other people's children about sex, and they don't. It's just such a misunderstanding of their role versus the parents' role in education. They also think they have the right to shut parents out of the conversation. And I'm sorry, Larry, to me that is mean girl behavior. That is, you can't sit with us because you're not part of the club. That's not how school is ever supposed to work. These people ought to live up to all the things they claim to be, which is kind and inclusive. Well, they're incredibly exclusive when you dare to disagree with them about things that are very important.
Well, we love everybody involved in this lawsuit, from Ian Pryor, who's spearheading it with American First Legal, to Matt Foldy and Bethany Mandel. Matt Foldy is like 27 years old. He's a journalist. He's all over the place in this town. I see him at every event, and I also see him covering Congress and political campaigns like no one else. He's tireless. He's also single, 27, and unmarried. I have no worries about him. Bethany, on the other hand, is married, and I believe she now has 17 children and probably expecting triplets as we speak. So I'm very worried about Bethany and her husband, Seth, in terms of the strain that this lawsuit may put on the family. But if anybody can do it, Bethany Mandel can.
Totally. Ian Pryor, Bethany Mandel, Matthew Foldy, all three of them are complete rock stars in this movement in totally different ways. So
absolutely,
with their powers combined, as the saying goes, I'm very excited to see what they can accomplish.
All right, enough praise for them. This would only be happening if it weren't for the O'Connor and Company. This is really about me and about this program, Angela. They should call this the O'Connor lawsuit, but we'll get to that later. It's 5:53.